Hello, students. Uh, I am providing you a virtual lecture. This is for our class Thursday, February 26th. This lecture will be focused on the same topic of this week. We touched on globalization. We touched on global markets. We'll continue that conversation for our lecture today. Obviously, this is a recorded lecture, so if you have any questions, um, I will also create a discussion board as well. You can click on that, post any questions if you have any questions for me in regards to the topic. You can also send me a direct email as well, or next time we meet in class, you can talk to me as well. So, as you may have been seeing uh, in the news, you've been seeing a lot about tariffs, which we spoke about frequently in class. One of the things to consider are the concepts of import, export, and free trade, right? So the idea or concept of free trade is that you can trade with one another without any sort of economic barriers, right? So, for example, I gave one of the examples of class I gave was about bananas, right? Why are bananas so cheap? In the example, I went over about the Banana Republic, not the clothing line, but the concept. And what we discussed was that the reason why bananas are cheap is because our US tax dollars subsidize or artificially brings down the cost of those bananas by providing tax benefits to the growers such that they can grow in other countries without having to worry about competition because the cost of bananas to grow bananas is exponentially more than what they actually charge, and the government helps subsidize to bring the cost of that product down to prevent competition abroad, right? So with an idea like free trade, this is referring to tariffs, right? So subsidy, the example I gave is subsidy is where the US government is giving tax dollars to a grower to help prop up and support their business such that they can be competitive. So if America is selling really cheap bananas in your country and your country grows bananas, that might be a threat to the industry of bananas in your country. So you put tariffs on American bananas to prevent that, or bananas wherever they're coming from, so that your industry is not challenged. So the idea of free trade is that you don't have to worry about tariffs. There's no political or economic barriers. So what's the advantage of free trade, or why would you do free trade, right? So these are just concepts, discussion points, right? So we click here and we can see pros and cons, right? So they're saying that a pro is that there's a large market, uh, productivity grows when countries produce goods and service, global competition and less costly imports keep prices down. Free trade inspires innovation for new products and keeps firms competitively challenged. Essentially, this stuff can come into your country as is or leave your country as is. It fosters competition. Uh, there's nothing barring entry between countries, right? But the problem is exactly what I mentioned, right? Uh, domestic, for example, the first example, domestic workers can lose their jobs due to increased imports and exports, imports or production shifts to low-wage global markets. Essentially, it can jeopardize your labor forces in your country because sometimes competition's good, sometimes competition's bad, right? So you don't really see free trade in a pure sense of the matter. Um, every country's unique. Every country has a methodology for trying to manage what they do. Some countries they can't grow certain things, right? They have to import everything. Some countries maybe they're good at manufacturing something. They're not good at producing the things. They don't have the raw resources. So every country has to kind of figure out based upon their geography. Uh, it's like playing a game, right? You're trying to figure out the education, the people, their skills, their abilities, resources you have, and you're playing like a Monopoly game based upon, the prime minister, right? Or the government. And you have to make decisions, right? What do you want to bring in? What do you not want to bring in? So, on paper, free trade sounds noble and uh capitalistic in an altruistic way, but it doesn't work that way, right? You could completely destroy and jeopardize healthy industries and jobs in your country. And it's not that it's better to have bananas in your country for cheaper. If you got a bigger, richer, stronger country using excess tax dollars to what could inevitably put everyone in your country out of business and then buy or take control over that potential land because now they put you out of business, that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing for your country. So free trade sounds nice. It's seems like a good, wholesome sounding idea, but there's really no free trade. Okay, so keep in mind the concept, right? So then you have comparative advantage and absolute advantage. And this is important because this is something this is like a standard test question, right? So comparative advantage is a country should sell to other countries those products that it produces most efficiently and buy from other countries those products that it cannot produce as effectively or efficiently, which makes sense, right? We create this really good. We're not so good at that, so we'll buy from you. That's sort of a makes sense sort of idea, right? If you're not good at doing something, outsource it from someone who's really good. If you're really good at doing something, be good at it, do it, provide it, produce it, profit off of it. So that's sort of the idea of a comparative advantage. The absolute advantage, in this case, the country has a monopoly in producing a specific product or is able to produce it more efficiently than all the countries. So we're in a live class, I would say, what's an example of an absolute advantage that a country has? They have a monopoly in producing something, and an example would be something specific to that country, right? You could have a monopoly over something, but the thing that you have a monopoly over may not necessarily be ground shaking or earth shattering, right? Like maybe there's knockoffs, right? But like Parmesan cheese, Parmesan Reggiano, uh, real Parmesan cheese, not the stuff you buy in the supermarket, but the authentic stuff. I think Parmigiano Reggiano, it only grows in one area of Italy because of the the uh, the bacteria from the sheep or from the cow. So it's like such a it's a very specific microbiome in that area, and it's the only place you can get it. Now, obviously, that you could follow the same process of making a cheese, and you make a Parmesan cheese that you could buy, but it's not the same, right? So, you could say they have a monopoly on that because that's the only region you can grow that because of the biology of the region, the biome of the region. But people make knockoffs, that inferior quality knockoffs, right? Uh, so I guess they have an absolute advantage, but you can go to your grocery store and buy a knockoff Parmesan cheese. That's Parmesan, but it's an example of, I guess a terrible example of monopoly. But essentially, a monopoly A country, if they have monopoly, it's really something physical only they can do, right? They're the only ones that have a thing. Usually, the geography, the biome, the area is very specific, you know, where they can provide that. Now, are there countries that have created monopolies on things, or even in a comparative advantage, something that they're really good at because they spent the time developing and honing that? Absolutely, right? The United States is one of the major oil manufacturers, right? They're not necessarily they're importing, raw oil wherever they're getting it from, but then they refine the oil, and America's one of the best of doing that. That's their thing, right? So they have a comparative advantage. Um, so think of comparative as a country that produces something efficiently and buys from other countries things that it can. In the example of the oil, comparative advantage is example for America, but oil being, before it's being made, before it's being refined, and after it's being refined. An absolute advantage is something where a country has an absolute monopoly over. And then keep in mind that the time too, like what generation of time, maybe a country had an absolute advantage of something in one point in time, and then it no longer has that monopoly over time. I'm thinking like weaponry, guns, things of that sort, you know. I mean, it's how the British conquered a lot of countries is because they had guns, right? Now you can go to your store and just buy a gun. You got people in countries that have no idea how to actually make a gun, but they can get it, which is sad. So, that's a whole other story for something else. We went over importing goods and services last time. We touched a little bit on balance of trade. So, uh, trade surplus is where you're exporting or selling more things from your country. Uh, Deficit is where you're importing more things, right? So it's never going to be perfect. A country isn't going to have perfect exports, perfect imports. So saying is favorable, unfavorable really depends on the survival of the country. Some countries they do a lot of importing because they don't have the resources, right? But then how are they bringing in the wealth, the money to offset that? Tourism, um, maybe some unique situation that that country can offer. Maybe a lot of expatriates who work abroad who fund back into their country, support their families. Depends, right? So it's nice to say on paper your country makes a lot of stuff and exports it, but it's not realistic to what a country sometimes can do physically based upon what it has available. Uh, you know, Depends. So for class purposes, you could say exporting more things is more favorable because you're manufacturing and selling things abroad, which is exporting, and that you're importing less stuff. But that's not the reality of every country and every situation, right? It's never going to be perfectly balanced. So, dumping. Dumping is something we should talk about, right? Is where you sell products in a foreign country at a lower price than those charged in the producing country. So I use the bananas as an example, right? Dumping is prohibited in the United States, right? That's what it says. So the bananas are a perfect example of dumping, right? It is where you can't produce a product at a certain price, but I can. And I flood your market with that product way below price of what you could produce it, which kind of crashes that product and that economic product, the economy of that product in your country, such that it could cause disruptions and problems, which is the intention, right? That's the intention of dumping. So putting a tariff would be a way to prevent dumping, right? You say, well, you're going to do that. I'm going to put a tariff on your product. So anyone in my country who buys it is going to pay 10 times what you're charging, right? So, uh, I mean, you could dump something and maybe at a loss just to disrupt some economy. A lot of games, and I would call them like monopoly warfare games, countries play with each other or could play. And dumping is one of those concepts and ideas. Now, what if your country is just really, really, really efficient? Like we just make stuff cheap and good. Is that dump? And I'm going to sell in your country, which is cheaper than what you can manufacture for. Is that dumping? Right. So, for example, you make something in China, you manufacture something in China, you manufacture something in Sri Lanka, which I discussed in another class. I can manufacture much cheaper there. So I do, and I import it here. Is that dumping? You know, I mean, Americans want to buy stuff for cheaper. I want it for cheap, right? Well, that's what Walmart does. They try to make stuff, get stuff as cheap as possible. So dumping is sort of is implied that there's a deliberate nature to sell products in a foreign country at lower prices than those charged in the producing country. There's a deliberate nature to dumping the product, right? There's an intended effect to it. So, there's being efficient, being competitive, and then there's like, I'm just dumping this stuff in your country, right? So it's a specific intended result for what you're doing. All right, so it's just a picture showing largest exporting nations in the world and the largest U.S. trade partners, right? So you see world's largest exporting nations, you got the U.S., both Canada, Mexico, France, China, India being a top U.S. trading partner. All right, now this little chart here gives you an idea of um, global markets, right? We spoke about reaching global markets. We spoke about how each country does business with each other differently. The laws, the rules is unique. It's country by country, right? So how the U.S. does business in Mexico is different than how it does business with the UK, is different than how it does business with China, India, Russia. The laws, restrictions, and things is everything is unique between countries, uniquely between countries, right? So if you're reaching global markets, what's the strategy? How do I do that? What are methods? So this is just sort of giving you this little chart, which is it's nice. So from the left is the least, to the right the most. Most what? That's right. So it's an amount of commitment, control, risk, and profit potential. So do you want to take more commitment and more risk? So you go more right or this way. And if you want less commitment, less risk, less profit potential, you go left, right? So licensing is to the leftmost, and foreign direct investment is to the rightmost. So licensing, I'll give you an example of licensing, right? The Marvel franchise or the Disney franchises, all the different products and intellectual properties that Disney has under its label, it can license that, right? If I want to make a Mickey Mouse backpack or a Thor hammer or something, if Hasbro or Mattel wants to make a toy, they license it from Disney, right? Or Marvel in this case, which is owned by Disney. What about Japan? What about China? Different licensing, right? You could have the licensing rights to produce something in the US, but Japan's a different country. China's a different country, right? What about something foreign or international, right? Like Dragon Ball Z or Hello Kitty or something from another country. Let's say I want to, obviously we see that in the US But initially, it was licensing. It was other uh, businesses in the U.S. that would take the risk to license the right to show those cartoon shows or sell their goods as a lower risk investment. And licensing is oftentimes easier strategy to reach global markets. In some cases, companies that are large enough, strong enough, and big enough to do foreign direct investment, they do licensing all the time because you could foreignly directly invest and then still be licensing in the country because someone wants to take out a license for something unique. They want to put your brand on something. So if we go from franchising and contract manufacturing and you move more to the right, joint venture is where you are jointly you're creating a JV or an actual joint venture with you and another company together to do something, right? Like maybe a car manufacturer is doing a joint venture with electronic software company to create something a unique in another country to pivot something. Who knows, right? So two companies come together, they do a joint venture. But when I say international joint venture, it could be like it's like a US company and then a broad company coming together, right? So it's like uh, maybe like a cola company coming together with uh, some sort of entertainment brand thing in another country so they can market together jointly their products in that country or something like that, whatever, right? So, joint ventures where have a joint, it's called a JV. It's called a joint venture. Foreign direct investments, you're like Starbucks. You're physically opening up Starbucks cafes in China. You're McDonald's in China, you're KFC in China. You're there selling your burgers, your chicken, your coffee. Uh, you know, I'm loving it, right? And there it is. And it's a foreign direct investment, right? You're not licensing the McDonald's logo or well, there's McDonald's does franchising. So I don't know much about how they obviously have to have a foreign direct investment where they're physically in the country. But then do they offer franchising to people in China? I have no idea. Versus if it's just pure foreign direct investment, I'm not too sure. Uh, but in that situation, they're there. They're not licensing to a third party burger company and they're just putting the McDonald's logo on their burgers and some other companies making burgers. They're there, right? But some people might do that. So when you're looking at global markets and that you're buying things in the US and it's a foreign product or service, is good to know, hey, is this a license thing or is this something that that company abroad is directly investing in? So understand this is important because it gives you an idea of the degree of how a global product or service is presented in the country you're doing business in, or things that you recognize in the US and how they're being presented abroad. Especially if you travel abroad, you could potentially go to McDonald's abroad, right? Um, because you have that flexibility to do that because they're abroad. And this is just sort of the definitions of the things we just spoke about, right? Franchising, contract manufacturing. So contract manufacturing is where um, it says a foreign company's production of private label goods to which a domestic company then attaches its own brand name or trademark. Uh, Apple, you know, you see their Apple product. It says, made in China, designed in California, right? So they have a contract manufacturing with manufacturers, and some companies they actually build their own factories in other countries, right? Uh, Tesla. I could, there's a lot of unique situations, right? And joint venture, which we went over. A strategic alliance is a long-term partnership between two or more companies uh, to help establish building a competitive market, right? Maybe it's better to unite together with another company because two heads are better than one, or is mutually beneficial for both parties to engage together to penetrate a market versus one person or one company taking the risk and failing. Uh, Actually succeeding together may benefit you in the long run versus trying to do it yourself and being unsuccessful, right? And we went over foreign direct investment. So foreign subsidy, a company owned in a foreign country by another company called the parent company, right? So the parent company is where a company maintains control over its technology or expertise. So, uh, sorry, foreign subsidiary. I said foreign subsidy. I meant to say subsidiary, excuse me. Foreign subsidiary. So, that's like Toyota of America and Toyota of Japan. It's a good example, but they're also engaging in foreign direct investment as well, right? So, uh, very common. Right? A lot of Japanese companies they have businesses in the U.S. They do direct investment here in the U.S. They have foreign subsidiaries. That's how it's usually done, right? For overseas companies investing in other countries. We spoke about multinational corporations in our prior classes. Very complicated, right? For a company to be doing business in multiple countries, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, great examples. Every country is different. You know, their tastes, their preferences, just the laws, the rules. Those companies, multinational companies, have tremendous expertise, uh, phenomenal expertise with not just doing business in other countries, but understanding other countries. Being able to do business success in other countries requires a lot of deep knowledge, unique knowledge. So multinational corporations know so much. It's kind of amazing to think about what they do know versus what someone else doesn't know and how they do it successfully. All right. So sovereign wealth fund. These are investment funds controlled by governments holding large stakes in foreign companies. So you hear the word sovereign, you think about like a country, all right? That's a country's whatever. So sovereign wealth fund is a country's wealth fund. So investment funds controlled by governments holding large stakes or ownership in foreign companies. So that would be a country, their investment funds owning a major country, a major foreign company overseas, whatever that might be. Like, I don't know, there's maybe China owning Coca-Cola or something, Coca-Cola stocks or whatever. I'm just using as an example, right? Now, lastly, I'll end on, sociocultural forces, right? Culture, obviously, I spoke about I spoke about burgers, right? Beef. People eat that in America, but you're not going to see that in India, right? So that may be changing. I do know there's different cultures. There's Catholic demographic in India, right? So um, it's not necessarily the whole country, but culture affects values, right? Beliefs, rules. This is an important part of global markets. I would say this is like the most important part of it, right? Because it's laws are also determined by the culture, right? Ethnocentricity is important. You can be in a country and not realize there's so many different ethnicities and values. So it's going to affect your product, your service, your branding. So you have to know what you're doing. You have to know who you're targeting. You have to really do a lot of research, understand. If you live in the country, you probably have a better idea versus you don't. But even if you live in a country, you may not know that ethnocentricity of that group of people, right? So, how do you research that? You read a book, you pull out a research document, you know, go live there. That's a problem in itself to figure out. Uh, but it's a problem you have to solve to be successful in the global markets, right? The better you can solve that, I mean, look, you can solve it in your own country, right? How many different uh, cultures are there living in the U.S.? And let's say values too, sub values, subcultures, sub values. What are they buying? What are they selling? What do they want? How attached are they to a brand or a thing or an idea? How attached are they to an idea that they're willing to spend money on it? Who cares if you believe in it or not? If you're thinking about business, what are they willing to do? What gets a person to spend, right? That's marketing. That's more of a marketing thing. And people think about that, right? They make t-shirts because of some stupid fad thing or whatever, and people are buying whatever to express themselves or something. Uh, Whatever, right? People wearing red hats versus people wearing something colorful. Culture. What matters, what if you're the guy selling the red hats and the colorful hats? Do you care? Are you making money? What matters, though, is understanding the global markets, the sociocultural forces, right? You got all those hats, they're all made in China, man. They're all made wherever. I know what the same, they don't care, right? They don't care about your politics, your beliefs. They're just selling your product. But you care so much you have to buy it and show it off, right? You feel good that you showed off your beliefs and politics and values. That guy over there in the other country is the one making money off of it. So understanding and seeing things a little more clearly, the culture, the cultural forces at bay or at will helps you to understand the 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 nature of everything you're dealing with. That makes sense, right? Because you're just kind of going through this world, experiencing everything one step at a time. You have your sensory experience, your daily sensory experiences. You wake up, you see things, you feel things, you react, you think things, you act on those things you feel and think throughout the day. But how often do you really step back and kind of assess the experience, people, the culture, all these things, right? And that's what's being asked to be done. If you're looking to penetrate a global market, you're looking to expand, you got to look and see about it, right? Assess and analyze about it, to sell, to understand, to market. But if you're living in it, you're not really stepping back and thinking about it. You're just sort of in it, right? You're in the ocean. You're experiencing it. So sometimes it's good to step back and sort of disassociate from your own self, your own being, maybe even your own beliefs and your own desires, and have an out of body experience and look and say, what? Step outside your own shoes and imagine you're in someone else's shoes and kind of assess the cultures, the people. It gives you some clarity because that's what you would essentially are what you're doing when you're looking at a global market. You're looking outside, but then you kind of have to be inside. Right now, you got to do the opposite. I need to understand how this market works. So I'm going to live there. I'm going to breathe and speak the language and, you know, become that sensory experience. And now I understand and feel it. But it's very different when you also step back out of it and saying, okay, right? And sometimes we don't think about stepping outside our own visage of our own experience in a similar fashion because it'll give you perspective and clarity on a lot of things, right? Okay, so I'll end on this last slide here, because we did kind of go over devaluation a little prior class where things lose value, but exchange rate. And then we touched on this a little bit, right? We went over the Chinese yuan in relationship to the US dollar, and high value of the dollar's trading more, low value of the dollar's trading less in foreign currency, and there's a floating exchange rate where currencies float in value depending on the supply and demand for them, the global market. So that means this applies especially to the US dollar. Who needs it, right? Who needs the dollar? Who needs the currency? So floating exchange is supply and demand based pricing. That's how that works. Um, the US dollar at one time, maybe still is, but less so than it was before, was held by many countries. It was sort of like had value, trade value, right? You hold U.S. currency. It was seen as a global bartering tool. China's been selling off the U.S. dollar, buying gold instead. So I don't know if that'll ever return back to the way it is, but it's definitely a shift and change, right? Something to think about and consider in terms of if you're a U.S. citizen, you're an American, you're living in this country, you're getting paid in US dollars, you're spending your US dollars, and other major countries are less interested in holding your currency, which was once the dominant currency. How is that going to impact you 10, 20, 30 years from now? Right? More buying power or less buying power? Something to think about. What are your alternatives? Be like China and buy gold, right? Uh, it's too early to tell because a lot of the pivoting, global pivoting, occurs later, not now. But you see the momentum happening now, concurrently. It's not always in the news, by the way. You can find it in the right news sources, but it's not something you're going to see openly, on the news. Oh, China's selling the US dollar. Countries are dropping the US dollar. You're not going to see that, right? You can Google it and find it. You can check out about it. Uh, but is that a permanent trend, a temporary trend? Is it depend on the presidency, the future, right? It's not a good trend for the U.S. economy. It's not a good positive trend. It's a negative trend. But America is a strong country for now. So you kind of take a look at it, you think about it, you pause for a second, and you just kind of keep your finger on the pulse and see what's going on. I think most people are not going to do that, are not going to care. And even if you told them to do it, they won't. Even if you warn them about it, they're not going to do anything. That's like 99% of them, of 99.9% of people aren't going to do anything. But I'm telling you because you're in my class, hopefully you're listening and learning, it's something you should take note of for your future, for your well-being. Be mindful, right? And it doesn't hurt to learn another language, right? You have decades to live in your life. You could download Duolingo or something like that, and you could learn new things. So understand what's going on around you. Use this material to educate yourself with definitions. So when you read journals, you read news sources, financial sources, you're able to understand what they're saying. That's what this whole class is about. It's just giving you a primer, understand concepts. So when you read something, you're like, oh, I know what they're telling me. And you can interpret it in a positive way or a negative way, or you could be self-aware of your economic environment so you can make decisions for yourself on what to do, what not to do. Okay. It's to empower you so you can educate yourself on the economic environment. And then when you're empowered and then you begin to educate yourself because you can understand what you're reading and seeing, then you can make decisions on what you want to do about it for yourself. Okay. Or whomever you choose to do that for. So just letting you know. Okay. Be mindful about the currency exchange, particularly with the US and how that may or may not pan out in the future with US currencies. Okay. So I will end this course, this lecture for today. I will also post a discussion board. Uh, and if you have any questions, you can always shoot me an email. We'll wait till we have our next meeting, but keep an eye on the announcements. Um, I will let you know when we have live sessions, recorded sessions. Watch the announcements, look at the announcements, check my emails because the announcements come via email. Okay. So take care, everybody, and I'll see you next time.